You've worked in SEO for 15 years, and you've seen algorithm updates, shift to mobile, voice search, and I'm sure many others. How does this AI disruption compare to those previous seismic changes?
I'd probably say this is the most substantial since I started because I think it fundamentally changes the way we see SEO as far as success. I mean, the metrics has always been like clicks and rankings, and now it's more like, am I being visible here? Like traffic was the be all end all, and that's still important, but like LLMs will never send the same amount of traffic as our search engine. So it's just setting like expectations.
Welcome to Get Discovered, a podcast about AI and online discoverability. In season 2 of the podcast, we're focusing on what we're calling the discovery crisis, how AI is changing where online discovery happens, what actually gets surfaced, and why many teams are realizing they don't have the visibility or control they thought they did. Today, we're speaking with Peter Rota, a technical SEO expert and thought leader. Peter has 15 years of experience working with companies ranging from local businesses to S&P 500 brands. He's been featured in sources like HubSpot, Business Insider, and SEMrush, and has built an 80,000 person following on LinkedIn, sharing SEO expertise. He has a deep technical background, but will keep the conversation accessible so business leaders can follow along while diving into specifics where it matters. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to be here. I always enjoy talking technical SEO. It's definitely one of my passions. So happy to chat.
Nice. That is not a sentence you hear frequently outside of this industry. um, do you have technical SEO friends? Do you guys get together? You go to the pub on the weekends and talk technical SEO?
I mean, I wish I had more like friends that are local. I mean, a lot of it's just a lot of LinkedIn, but I like doing more of the virtual stuff, but hopefully one day there'll be some that are closer to me.
Got it. Nice. So we always like to open an episode with a segment we call This Week in AI News, but it doesn't necessarily have to be just this week. So what did you want to talk about just to start the conversation?
Yeah, sure. So back in July, SEMrush basically did a study with clickstream data that showed that it's no longer search engines versus LLMs, it's actually both. So they show that basically people that started using LLMs and Google actually increased their sessions on Google. So I think it's important because sometimes people think it's either this or that, or all sessions start on AI versus all sessions start on Google. So I think it's just important that like LLMs may not necessarily send the same amount of traffic as Google, but they are still important in the buyer's journey.
Can we double click on session a little bit? So can you kind of walk through the listeners what you mean when you say session?
So a session is basically if I go to Google and I'm putting in a query that so a search like a keyword, that would be considered a session. So it's basically saying people, because of AI LLMs, they're using Google more because they're trying to ask more direct questions, or sometimes they're trying to validate things that are coming up in LLMs.
Got it. And you already mentioned this a little bit, but what really specifically stands out to you and what implications do you think it has? So you talked about this on a high level, but everything is kind of converging. Is there any other signal that you think people should pick up from this?
I mean, one thing that I've heard people talk about, I've also spoken myself, is just understanding how you're attributing sales and leads. Like traditionally, many activities was like the last click attribution, and a lot of proponents, including me, are more aligned with like the assisted one, where it's like each buyer's journey gets more weight because if someone comes in initially to your site through say an LLM and then they convert with Google, then Google is going to get the full credit versus like there's a whole process. So you kind of need to just understand the buyer's journey, and it's messy now, unfortunately. It's not like what it used to be where it's like, okay, I Google something, I buy something, or it's like, okay, like social media Google. There's just a lot more steps involved.
I like to explain it as the landscape is much more fragmented than it used to be. and that makes attribution a particularly difficult topic. We'll expand on that a little bit later. But yeah, thanks for sharing. I think it's important for everyone to take account of these changes and how important it is to reframe their thinking around what they do with that information and what their strategy needs to become to adapt to this changing reality. The difficulty is it's changing so quickly that sometimes it's hard to know where the solid ground actually is. So there's a lot of guessing and experimentation, but that's part of what this podcast is about is bringing everybody on this journey for us to experiment and learn how some of these things work as they adapt in real time. So with that said, I want to go in a little bit more on your vantage point here. So you've worked in SEO for 15 years and you've seen algorithm updates, shift to mobile, voice search, and I'm sure many others. But
Yeah.
let's take this AI disruption, if you want to call it. How does this AI disruption compare to those previous seismic changes?
I'd probably say this is the most substantial since I started because I think it fundamentally changes the way we see SEO as far as success. I mean, the metrics has always been like clicks and rankings, and now it's more like, am I being visible here? I mean, conversions was always important for me, but conversions is getting more of, I guess, like importance. So I think it's just the overall understanding of what is important now versus what was important 5 years ago. And I've had many talks and just trying to explain like a lot of it comes down to managing expectations and just being transparent as far as like how things work now. And a lot of it's just like traffic was the be all end all, and that's still important, but like LLMs will never send the same amount of traffic as our search engine. So it's just setting like expectations.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, do you think that there are certain industries or content types that are hit harder by this AI disruption? Like, who's suffering the most right now?
Yeah, I've heard a ton as far as news publishers, they're getting hit pretty hard, and especially content heavy sites are getting hit super hard too. Some of the sites we manage too, like a lot of, not all of it, but we have like a glossary and blog section. Those have been hit very hard year over year because like either now it's like it's being surfaced in AIOs or LLMs, so people are not clicking through to basically get to the website. So definitely a lot of the informational content, though I'm hearing more and more that some AIOs and LLMs are coming down to like the middle, the bottom of the funnel. So I think it's just like put out content that is create content based on what's actually useful to the user versus the past where it's like we're creating this because we want more search engine visits. So
Yeah,
like once again, it's like changing the mindset and like the expectations of what you want
yeah,
slash expect.
yeah. When you work with a client, given all of these changes, what's the first sign you look for that tells you their traffic problem is an AI discoverability issue rather than a traditional, in air quotes, SEO issue?
I mean, a lot of the ways I see AI discoverability is honestly just doing good SEO. I know essentially like LLMs, a lot of besides, I think Gemini, and I think there's maybe Copilot, they're basically not able to render JavaScript, which was definitely an issue before, but now it's an even bigger issue. So I would say that. And then schema, I mean, I wouldn't say it was an issue before, but I think it's gotten almost a second light as far as like people wrote it off beyond just the rich results. But I feel like anything that's going to make LLMs easier to understand your job, I mean, sorry, website, it's going to help beneficially. And another one I would say is page speed, but more towards time to first byte, which essentially, and I always get the definition confused, but I think it's basically like the majority of the content loads are basically the first content that search engine crawlers see. So the way LLMs work is they have this thing called retrieval augmented generation, where basically if they're unable to think of like the answer to a question, they're going to use the search engine results. and they visit sites in live time. So basically, if your website doesn't load like pretty fast, you're not included in that set of results or sources they search through versus Google, which basically in the past they index your content and they're showing you cached version so you could get away with a bit more. So it's like you just need to be really proactive and just have a really fast site.
Yeah, makes sense. So I want to ask you one question here, and I think we've touched on this already about ranking factors that matter more for AI
Yep.
discovery than they did for traditional search. And I'll preface this a little bit because
Yep.
in previous discussions we've had on the podcast and just in some discussions I've had with other people in the industry, it really seems like the theme is getting back to first principles of SEO. When it first started, it was about putting unique, valuable content out, having a substantive, useful website, all of those things. And then it seems like we veered off course because SEO became actually Google optimization with everything else kind of on the side.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of the industry that seemed to always be chasing, okay, how can we look at the recent algorithm update and what do we need to change? Like, okay, so now we need to start adding backlinks, and then we're going to have companies that do backlinks specifically for you and all of these things. It was all of this. It was kind of like gaming the system a little bit. And it seems like what we have now is actually, I don't know if it's leveling the playing field, but it's getting back to first principles of having legitimately valuable content with data and things that are actually citable. Do you think that's the right kind of perspective on this? Are there ranking factors that matter more for AI discovery than they did for traditional search that you can think of?
I mean, that's pretty in line with what I've kind of approached SEO, where it's like always build a good foundation. But I think at least with Google, you might have been able to get away with more divs and the more less semantic SEO versus for LLMs, they're kind of trying to better understand that and you need to speak their language more, so to speak. But I mean, I think with LLMs, it's a lot more about branding and notoriety versus, say, with SEO, we have really good content, we're optimized, we have high backlinks, you can get away with it. But LLMs look a lot more for consensus and how well something is known.
Mm,
So I think that's the one of the biggest differences where it's like you could have like here's a domain with like, I don't know, like ADDR and maybe it has like shoddy content and you can get away with it versus LLMs are looking for a consensus. They're looking for what people are saying. They're looking at like micro communities and things like that, which is part of Google, but I would just say LLMs are a lot more consensus based and just they're looking for branded signals because they want more consensus slash they want to serve something they're confident in serving, even though they do hallucinate sometimes. But I think it's a lot more they just truly try to understand as much about something versus Google, where sometimes it's just like this is SEO friendly versus this is for LLMs.
yeah. I'm gonna just call this out because I think it's funny when we do this as humans. We anthropomorphize these large language models. So when you say it's looking to understand something, that's we. I think as humans right now, we lack the vocabulary to accurately represent what's happening under the hood of large language models. And I think
Agreed.
we need to evolve on that a little bit. But I like to call that out. And I'm the first person to make those same kind of mistakes. You know, when I'm
Yeah,
using Claude and it says, okay, stand by, I'm thinking, it seems in my head, oh, it is thinking. But no, it's actually
yeah,
just crunching data and looking at the, clustering algorithm on the back end or whatever else drives it. It's
yeah.
just a mathematical prediction algorithm on the back end of that. Are you someone, this is just going to be a random question, but are you someone who says hello and thank you when you use a large language model?
No, but I mean I use thank you. I don't say hello, but yeah. I mean I'd be like thanks for that. I won't say hello because
Mhm.
I think the intent is if you're already typing, they know who you are. But
Yeah.
I find I've seen studies where basically it seems like when people were more polite to the LMs, they got better output. So, I mean, and it's weird to say, like, I treat everyone, I guess now LLM bots with respect. So it's like, unless they're like being like jerks, I'm gonna just be respectful. So
Yeah.
I guess that plays into like the people that created their game because it's like I'm being nice to LLM too. You're treating it like a person.
Yeah. I mean, I
So
do it because I do it for two reasons. Number one, I don't want to get out of the habit of being polite with real people, right?
yeah,
Number
that's
one.
a good.
And
Yeah,
number two, just in case AI, wherever it comes from, develops sentience and autonomy, I want to be
yeah,
remembered as a kind human. You know, this guy
absolutely.
always said thank you. He always asked me how I was doing in the morning and so on and so forth. Anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent, but
No, you're good.
I want to transition into more of the shift underway here and kick this off here with a question for you. So let's talk about what still works and what doesn't, and make that a little bit more concrete. If you're advising a brand today, what SEO fundamentals are more important now than they were before? This kind of builds on what we were just talking about, but I'd like to bring it home a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to just your overall foundation. So the semantic SEO, where it's like strong title tags, using HTML tags over a div. So you're using actually like body tags or ordered list or unordered list or footer, and then you're actually breaking up content, which I think was always part of SEO, but it's like making sure a page is readable. I mean, a lot of it's fundamentally SEO, but I think what you mentioned a bit earlier was doing the fundamentals, which I feel like has been lacking for some SEO. So it's like having strong internal links so they understand like LLMs understand like how your website is like leveled, and then breadcrumbs and JavaScript there as far as the LLMs and JSON schema goes. And then obviously the JavaScript too. So you want all of your important content in basically the view source slash raw HTML. And ideally making your site as fast as possible because these LLMs are basically they a little less patient versus Googlebot, where they'll if they can't crawl your site, they'll go elsewhere. They'll just keep crawling. So I actually spoke about it. And I wrote about it today on LinkedIn, but making sure you are looking at your crawl logs beyond Google Search Console because things could be fine in Google Search Console, but you could be blocking bots or you could have unresolved requests and things like that. So I think it's definitely more importance on crawl logs. Like I felt like they were important before, but people often wouldn't look at them until there was an issue. But it's like you kind of need to be proactive and understand because opposed to Googlebot slash Google that's been around since 1998, LLMs are primarily new, so we're still trying to understand how they work and how they crawl things. So you want to have as much data and resources at your disposal to make the best decisions.
Yeah. A couple of things I want to pick through there. First off, I think thematically what I'm hearing for you is that technical SEO is as important as it ever was, just from an organizational perspective, right? So it makes the page easier for the large language model to understand where to look if your page is properly organized. And there's a difference between what it looks like to you or a human looking at the page. It might look fine, but if your technical SEO is maybe off in some places, it could end up rendered completely wrong or disorganized and take too long for the large language model to actually parse, in which case it
Yep.
would just move on to the next and the next and so on and so forth. That's where I also think, like you mentioned, JavaScript. That's another thing too, because we're pre-render. We help
Yeah.
pre-render JavaScript. So I won't, this podcast isn't about plugging pre-render, but we do have some people who ask us, well, with everything changing with search, is pre-rendering still relevant? I say, actually, it's even more so because Google has infrastructure to pre-render sites at scale. and they have devoted a tremendous amount of money to building out that infrastructure, and they spend a tremendous amount maintaining it. And even then, you still need, a solution. When it comes to large language models, let's take OpenAI, for example. They're burning anywhere between $10 and billion a year on infrastructure build out. The revenue that they get in return is just minuscule compared to their forward-looking commitments. I think it's by this point $1.4 trillion in CapEx commitments over the course of the next 5 years. The idea that they will build out and pay to run additional compute resources for pre-rendering sites when their primary focus on CapEx and investing in infrastructure is for their core product right now, and they're not even making money on it, that's just a non-starter. So it's likely to continue and maybe even become more of a challenge to make sure that your site is pre-rendered and you have good speed for the large language models to actually pull content from. And I think it will be interesting to see how schema changes over time. We've got some forward-looking ideas on that are maybe a little bit out of the context of this episode, but it's interesting to think about where the web is going. I want to tie it back to you though. So another question for you. So where are you seeing teams waste time on metrics that look good but don't drive actual visibility anymore?
Are you talking about SEO or for LLMs?
Let's say SEO. Yeah.
I mean, I think basically on kind of absolutes. So, I mean, clicks are still important, but they don't tell the full story. So, putting more precedence on basically revenue and things like impressions. Keyword rankings, I think, are still somewhat important, but you need to understand what keywords are actually valuable versus what are actually going to drive conversion. So I think it's just understanding how the market has changed. The landscape has changed, I would say. I mean, at least for one of my jobs, we've been focusing more on, I guess, the traffic as a whole. So it's like now we're communicating like if also direct and referral traffic and kind of just tying all that back in to look at like the overall scope of a website, because oftentimes a lot of those traffic channels are very integrated, and I feel like LLMs kind of made that more important because as we talked about, like the buyer's journey is fragmented and they're using multiple different areas, so you truly need to like understand, I think, just how your traffic is.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I would say too is the focus on just purely backlinks. I think those are still important, but even just getting cited on Reddit, if it's not a backlink, you're still going to influence AIOs and LLMs. So I think the backlink only mentality is you want to have like a more of a branded type of approach. So I mean, we have a PR team we work with, and sometimes like in the past, and we still try to do, it's like, can we get a backlink? But it's like sometimes now if you get cited or mentioned, like that's even more important than a backlink, because that's probably going to convert better versus here's a backlink and maybe you're ranking the top 3 results, but you don't actually get the conversion.
A theme that I'm pulling out of this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's a problem with attribution, even more than it really ever was. And attribution for the lay audience is just being able to attribute an outcome to the path that preceded it, right? So you want to be able to say, in a perfect world for every marketer, you would say, this person bought my product because they searched for me on Google, and these are the terms that they searched for, and these are the other sites they came to on the way to me. Or this person bought my product or subscribed to my newsletter because they heard about it on this podcast, this specific podcast or whatever. So you're trying to attribute the outcomes to the activities so that you can make your investment decisions. And with the disruptions that we have, this fragmented landscape of search and discoverability and everything, there's blindness there. I think we still haven't figured out how to improve our understanding of attribution, especially when it comes to large language models. So that's something I'm kind of pulling out there. Do you think that's a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, even before this, I feel like a lot of times SEO was always harder to kind of even get buy-in in attribution because it's like if I'm higher up in the organization and I'm like, okay, I did these paid ads and I can clearly see where the conversion was, where it's like SEO, obviously you know it's working, but sometimes it was often hard to show the value slash
Mhm.
okay, this person searched this, like what they converted on. So I feel like SEO has always had that issue where it's like harder to attribute, but obviously with LLMs it makes it even more complicated.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because that was literally my next question for you. So technical SEO, I think is difficult to tie to revenue and in a very specific sense. Like it's hard to say, okay, we updated the technical SEO on your site, and then that's the reason why you saw this uplift in revenue this month. Like it's very difficult to draw that line. And I think apropos what we've been speaking about here, and with other guests we've had on the podcast, AI, these large language models are also breaking that attribution system. So it's making it even more difficult. So when one of your clients, like a CFO or a CEO, asks you to prove the ROI of technical SEO as inclusive of AI visibility in today's landscape, what do you actually show them?
I mean, it's something I'm still trying to understand myself. So we've been looking at some a different visibility tracking software to kind of better understand how we're showing up. I think right now, at least for me, it's focusing on the visibility versus say rankings, which are non-deterministic on LLM. So I think it's trying to just understand where you're coming up for and those prompts that probably are most instrumental as far as like what's going to actually get someone to convert. So I'm still trying to understand it, so I don't have like a clear answer, but I think it's just trying to understand how visible you are and where your competitors are and basically just getting visible there because like I mentioned before, LLMs don't send a ton of traffic, but I think they could definitely be a lot more influential than search engines,
Mhm.
because people are asking deeper questions. So I think it's just understanding like how your overall sentiment as far as what they understand of you. So it's a lot more like ORM, which I think search engines have important in the past, but it's I think it's just getting an understanding of like your overall sentiment as far as like how LLMs view you, and obviously if you're not viewed well, you obviously want to make changes. But I mean, at least like the stuff we're reporting on for me is reporting on like referrals and sessions and conversion. So we're reporting on those, but as far as like visibility scores and some of those are like the greatest metrics. So I try to like focus on ones that like upper management can understand because it's like they're not going to really care about like visibility. Maybe they're going to try to care more about maybe referrals and sessions and how are we doing over time and things like that.
Yeah. It's almost as if the world of marketing went through this phase where we had this really, really fantastic attribution with, everyone had cookies, everyone was searching the same search engine. Google itself, which was the primary and still is the primary search engine, owns this huge ad network, right? So you had all of this tracking from all of the websites that you were coming across, even if you didn't go to Google, and all of that was linked together through Google Analytics. So we went through this golden era that I think was actually just a privacy nightmare but that's like a different topic. And now we're back
Sure.
to this era where it's almost like I'd imagine marketing teams in the 50s and 60s talking about buying ads on TV or putting a billboard next to a high traffic expressway or something like that. You can measure general uplift, right? And that's going to be a lagging indicator, but you are never going to be able to get clean attribution. You're never going to be able to say, this person subscribed to my software product because they saw the billboard next to the US 101 on their drive to work at 8 a.m. on Wednesday morning. Right. And so I feel like large language models are maybe not quite that imprecise, but it's more so, it's closer to this. We bought a billboard and what are the results, than it is we put this new content out, what are the results, and how many people looked at that, and how many people came from which source, and then what does that mean for conversion, and where should we invest our time and prioritizing for different sources. It's become much more amorphous and difficult to quantify, but also plan, I think. Yeah. So speaking of planning, I haven't met a single marketing team that has unlimited resources. So everybody has to prioritize what they work on. And now that AI has entered the chat, pun intended, what are you consciously telling your clients to prioritize and deprioritize?
Yeah, I mean, prioritizing is definitely kind of getting deeper into schema. So under kind of showing the relations between each page in the overall grand scheme of things. And especially if you have a knowledge panel or if you don't have a knowledge panel, establishing that entity home, which is basically if you have an about page, you basically create information about your company and then you corroborate that information throughout the internet, which I mean was important for LLMs, but it's more just the validation and them understanding that. Another one is basically making sure that all your important content is in the raw HTML, which could be, I don't want to get too technical, but it could be like pre-render, which is a good source, as well as server-side rendering. So it's definitely a more critical analysis, more focus on that because with Google, you could have got away with it. They're eventually able to crawl and render this stuff, but you're basically invisible if you're in JavaScript on LLMs for the framework. So you really want to just focus heavily on those things. I think page speed, I would definitely be focusing on that. Not like necessarily always the core web vitals, but like the time to first byte. So making sure you're making sure the website, I think recommendations at this point are either 3 seconds or under 4 seconds, but basically you want the website to load as fast as possible. I think at least with Google, they would be more forgiving, but with LLMs, they almost seem like they have a limited crawl budget, so they're just going to crawl somewhere else if they can't get you, and they're a little less impatient. I mean, yeah, more impatient. I'd say things were deprioritizing. I mean, I'd say I'm still prioritizing backlinks, but I would say almost maybe not living or dying by like here's a mention, but we can't get a backlink out of it, and then basically you cross that off your list.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the past, it's like, oh, we can get a no follow link and it's no value. But now, like, I've even seen studies where, like, sometimes no follow links are actually more valuable to LLMs versus they were in Google because it's another like reference or way to validate something. So I think that and just what I had mentioned a bit earlier in the podcast was the all or be nothing mindset of traffic and clicks over everything. So just that too, and something I've spoken about on LinkedIn too is the fact that LLMs will never send the amount of traffic Google sends, and I think we need to come to a fundamental understanding of and just accept that because they're like, how do we get this traffic back? And it's like, I don't think we can get the traffic back. So it's like you're explaining because sometimes they're like, how do we get this traffic back? And it's just setting that clear expectation. Like, people are still searching, but they're doing it off the website. So it's just, I would say that too.
Yeah.
So just the expectations and backlinks are only good if it's a follow link versus like a no follow.
Okay. Makes sense. I have another question for you. So, what, in your experience, what's the biggest misconception that clients or business leaders have about AI and search visibility?
I mean, something I'm learning more and more about is how a lot of these visibility tracking softwares are actually tracking things. So I'm not like 100% sure, but I know on some of them they use an actual interface where basically they'll use proxies to basically get data, and then some of them will use an API. So I think it's really important to understand where they're actually getting the data from, because it's not always going to be super representative of potentially what people are searching. Another one I'm seeing, which I mean, it's kind of always been the same thing with search engine, is the prompt volume. I'm seeing like prompt volume, like I saw something for like SEO that had more searches on LLMs versus Google search, which is I found odd because more people are using Google search. So I think it's not looking specifically at like how many people are searching for these things. And another one too is how LLMs are a lot more personalization driven. So it's like it it's hard to track certain queries because people are very personalized, and they're non-deterministic, so they're going to focus more on personalization. And it's like you can ask an LLM one thing and they're going to give you 100 different outputs. So I think it's just understanding the frequency of how often you're showing up somewhere versus the absolute. So I think it's just like, once again, you really need to understand the data. And another one too, I've seen a lot of tools is like they provide the data, but they don't really provide next steps as far as how to make it actionable. So that's something I'm working on myself and trying to just make it more actionable. So I think a lot of these tools, like there was almost like sales where it's like they sold the dream, but now it's like you actually have to like apply the insights. So I think a lot of it's just understanding, okay, we're showing up here. What action do we take now?
Yeah. I want to double click on something that you mentioned because we've done our own research as well. And it relates to tracking visibility for your brand and
Mhm.
large language models. So there are a lot of companies out there nowadays. I think there's a new one born every week, at least. I can think off the top of my head 20 or 30 of these, and we could put in the bucket of prompt tracking or large language model visibility tracking. And the primary method for them to do that is to use prompts that either they infer based on your ideal customer profile or your business or something else, or you actually instruct them. You know, these are the things that we think we would appear in or what our clients would be asking. So we want to see if we show up. So they take those prompts and then they can go one of two ways. They can open up an actual chat. Let's use ChatGPT. So they would open up a browser window and type these prompts into ChatGPT in a logged out account. And then they would look at the results that come back. And then that's the data that's passed to you as their customer. Okay, these are, you did or did not appear in these prompts and this different, time period that we looked at it. And that's even more complicated because, as you mentioned, it's non-deterministic. So you can ask the same question 5 times and you'll probably get 3.5 answers, right? There's going to be overlap, but it's still an issue. So anyway, that's one. We put that in the quote unquote UI scraping bucket of how these tools work. And then the other is actually using the APIs. So if you want to track queries, you can just do API calls to OpenAI. We'll stick with them for this example, but you have to remember to enable web search, because if you just do an API query to OpenAI with a prompt, it just looks at its data that it has already trained on. So you need to enable web search for that, and that becomes a little bit more expensive. And it was interesting. The way I say this is the reason I'm bringing this up is the research that we did. we talked about overlap. So overlap is how much of what you saw using this tool actually overlaps with the experience of a real customer that you are targeting, right? And this comes down to what you just mentioned about personalization. So Google is personalized, right? The more you use Google Maps, Gmail, YouTube, Calendar, Gemini now, that becomes more and more personal. But I think the personalization of, for example, ChatGPT and Claude is another level even. And it's a personalization that is not just about understanding the values you have on a feature matrix, like you're male, you're in your 40s, you like, I don't know, running, or you have a dog or whatever. It's this more holistic personalization about how you like to communicate and how you like to be communicated with, and the topics of interest, but the nuances of that is no longer just you're into sports, but is much more specific. You're into sports, and right now you're training for an Ironman, and you're having problems with your Achilles tendon, right? It goes even further. So all of this is to say that it's very difficult to have good overlap between these two things that we spoke about, either scraping UI, so using these synthetic prompts and just getting the responses and seeing what comes up, or the API. And I think the challenge is that this industry, we actually have, some partnerships with some of these companies, and I, respect the growth that they're seeing, and I don't want to say that their tools are not valuable, but I think it's important for customers that subscribe to those tools to understand this is giving them directional signals, but it's non-deterministic. It changes by the day. And the more divergence there is between what you think your customers are and are looking for and what they actually are, the less insightful that data becomes. And to your point, even further, it's just data, and you need to yourself infer what to do with it. And it's a big challenge. That's always the challenge with marketing data anyway, right? It's just data. You need to have something that can be prescriptive. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox there for a little while. But so I think this is maybe one of the biggest misconceptions: is measuring visibility correlates with reality. If we could, maybe that's a bit reductive, but let's sum it up like that. Do you have an opinion about why that misconception persists?
As far as the attribution, or like what someone's seeing in the prompts are not what the users are searching?
Yeah, what's the prompt overlap? We'll call it that. Yeah.
I think it's like they're trying to apply a solution to something. They're basically trying to put something in a box that can't be boxed. So search engines obviously have always been personalized, but like you were saying, I don't think it was to the degree of LLM. So I think it's hard to track things that when you start getting beyond keywords into full sentences. And something I've heard a few people talk about is using personas as far as like that for tracking prompts. So I think it's until we can actually see like what people are typing in, and it's hard to actually like know what to track. I mean, you could say like I want to track these things, but I mean the API is probably as close as we're gonna get. I would love to have something like Google Search Console where it's like here you are on like the LLM, and this is the page that came up, and these are like the fan out queries, but I don't know if we'll get there. So I think it's just that's another reason to even better understand your customers more, because a lot of these traditional tools are not going to tell you about your customer because that's like usually internal data. So, I mean, I've heard of SparkToro, which I've not used personally, but I've heard good things. But I think it's just knowing your customer even more, because like before it was like, oh, okay, here's these keywords and we can guess like what people are going to search, but you just really need to understand your customers even more at this point.
Yeah, makes sense. Oh, one of the last questions I have for you is about the future. So, looking forward the next 12 to 18 months, in your opinion, what part of this online discoverability system do you think will get worse before it gets better?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely see clicks continuing to drop, but not just because of AI. I think Google is trying to basically add more ads to the overall LLMs and AI experience, and even locally, we're seeing a lot of ads there. So I think traffic is going to definitely continue to drop. I'm hoping that these tools get a bit more useful beyond just data and things like that. I think also, not it's like necessarily bad, but I think there'll continue to be misinformation as far as like SEO is dead and what's actually useful. So I think it's a lot. Just like clicks will continue to go down. We'll have to look for better ways to attribute what's happening or look at areas for success as far as like how to measure success and things like that. But I mean, it definitely doesn't mean definitely not any bored or dull days in the SEO slash AI space for sure. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'd probably say that and just better understanding LLMs and just getting an idea of how they think because they're not like search engines and they do make more mistakes. So you just really need to like still use your brain with a lot of these tools. A lot of people they put a lot of faith in these LLMs and you still need to check the output. So my concern is a lot of and even I feel like I may have even done it myself. It's like you're stop thinking critically when something else will do for it. So I feel like people will look for more and more shiny objects to solve things and they lose that critical thinking and they lose the ability to think with their gut. So unfortunately, I think that will continue to happen more, but I think people eventually come to their senses, but it's just like there's so many tools right now and it's like how can I like automate something or how can I use LLMs to like speed things up?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you raise a good point about thinking critically. And again, back to this anthropomorphization of large language models. It's not what it's doing, even though it seems like that. But and I've fallen victim to this myself. I have a lot of stuff to do and I just want to okay, I just need to write this document. How should I structure it? Whatever, and just let it produce that. And I think what gets worse before this gets better is humans' relationship with these tools as we figure out where the boundaries of real value actually are and what this does to us in the long term. I think it's going to be longer than 12 to 18 months, frankly, where it gets a little bit worse before it gets better. But I think that's another thing I would add to the list is just the understanding of how to make use of these in a real way that doesn't atrophy our critical thinking skills, fill the world with AI slop that turns us off to interacting with each other and so on and so forth. These are big challenges that we need to work through. Not even just focusing on online discoverability, but so last question for you: if listeners remember one thing from this conversation, what would you want that to be?
Don't forget the fundamentals of SEO because a lot of those will give you the 80/20 of um, showing up an LLM. So a lot of the AI optimization principles evolve from SEO. A lot of them are SEO that's just been repackaged as LLM or chunking or things like that. So
Mm,
if you're doing SEO for the most part, you'll definitely be off to a good start.
good. That's nice and clear. The just get back to first principles. Make stuff that
Yeah,
matters, is unique, is accessible and easy to read, and the rest will follow, basically. Right.
yeah, exactly.
Uh, so where can the listeners find you?
On LinkedIn. So if you search Peter Rota, I come up there on the bald SEO. And then also I have my personal site, peterrotaseo.com. But yeah, I mean, I like do freelance on the side. So anyone looking for like any local SEO or e-commerce or any technical, happy to help.
Perfect.
Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, Peter, thanks for making the time. After each episode, we share a short prompt to help you monitor how AI is changing your brand's visibility. We call it the Monday Morning Action, but don't worry, you can do it any day of the week.
This week's action: check your technical SEO. In our conversation with Peter, we talked at length about the importance of technical SEO fundamentals, but issues can be hard to recognize.
So here's what you do. Step 1, go to your website on your phone. Step 2, copy the link of your most important page, not your home page.
Step 3, share that link in a Slack DM, WhatsApp, or iMessage. Step 4, if your link preview is slow to load or incorrect information shows up, you may have a technical SEO issue without even realizing it.
Why does this matter? Hidden technical SEO issues hinder your ability to show up on any search channel, but especially large language models.
If anything surprises you about these results, we'd love to hear about it. Share what you noticed at Prerender.io/podcast for a chance to be featured in a future episode.
Thanks for tuning in to Season 2 of Get Discovered, the podcast where AI and online discoverability collide.
If you learned something new this episode, make sure to subscribe for more in the future.
For more about us, swing by Prerender.io. We make sure your site isn't hiding from Google, Bing, or the next-gen AI bots that are sniffing around for fresh content. I'm your host, Joe Walsh.
And I'm your producer, Carly Van Stolk. See you next time.